Welcome. I'm Sebastian Mahfood, and you're listening to WCAT Radio, the on-air wing of En Route Books and Media, bringing you the dulcet sounds of Catholic wisdom with our host, Bob Olson, who will now introduce today's show and speaker.
WCAT Radio proudly presents The Open Door. I have left an open door before you, which no one can close. A program offered by Commander Al Hughes, Bob Olson, Rhonda Chervin, Richard Garrity, Jim Hannock, and Katie Hughes. Open to the love of God, open to joining his stream of love for others. And let's meet our panel now. First of all, we have Dr. Rhonda Chervin, Catholic writer from Corpus Christi, Texas. Welcome, Rhonda.
Hello.
Dr. Richard Garrity from Birmingham, Alabama, professor of philosophy at EWTN, writer of books about Aristotle's Ethics, Plato's Republic, was also writing a book about Blessed Cardinal Newman's Apologetics. Welcome, Richard.
Thank you.
Dr. James Hannock from Los Angeles, philosophy professor, father of 5 children, pro-life activist, editor at New Oxford Review. Good to have you back, James. Yes.
Good morning.
And finally, Commander Al Hughes from Corpus Christi, Texas, colonel in the Air Force, a married father who converted to the church from being an agnostic, and also has degrees in engineering and pastoral studies. Take it away, Commander Al.
Thank you, Bob, and good morning to everyone. Today our topic is the question of what does a Christian mean when he uses the word love. The problem is, if you went into a crowd of people and just threw that word out, love, most of the people in that crowd will think of either sex or passion in one form or another, which is not what the Christian means by love. The problem is there are several kinds of love, and the Greeks have solved the problem with 4 different words for love. But in English we have only the one word, so that adds to the confusion. So the issue today is to clarify that confusion and try to define exactly what the Christian means when he speaks of love, whether love of God or love of his fellow man, his fellow Christian. So would someone like to leap in on this one?
Well, insofar as I just, about 4 years ago, I put together 4 little books I had involving love into one volume, 400 pages, big print, called The Way of Love, so that I put it into one volume and self-published it so that I could sell it for $10 to students. I mean, they get it on Amazon for $10, and I get maybe 10 cents profit, 10 cents royalty on it. But just the same. But now that book, which people loved in classes on the nature of love, and also love in workshops that I give on the same subject using that book is now in a deluxe new edition put out by Dr. Sebastian Mahfood on En Route Books, which En Route Books is the publisher that sponsors this radio station. So, of course, I have a lot to say on the nature of love, but this having been said, why don't we see what other people have to say first?
Maybe we could start with something like this. Love is the steady willing of the good for others and the steady acting to bring it about, keeping in mind that love is used in an analogous way. One loves one's spouse, one perhaps loves one's dog, and I love to play chess. So as was noted by Al, we have a limit on the use of the word love because we don't have enough ways of speaking of love. So when we use this one word, we have to spell out how it works in this particular context with this particular object of love. And I would add that one of the best ways of thinking about love and the object of love is to think about what it is to love the person. And to that I would add that when we really love the person, we love something that goes beyond this quality or that quality. So that's one way of approaching it.
This is Al. I think in terms of centeredness, where are you centered in your outlook on life? If for instance, you are centered on the making of money, it could be said that you love money because that's the center of your whole outlook on life. That is actually a self-love because the love of money has to do with your own aggrandizement. And the same then is true of love of power, those who seek power above all else. That's also winds up being self-love. And then the easy life or the happy life, the relaxed, laid-back life is another source that you might say you love that kind of life, but you're actually saying that you love yourself. So that's a self-centeredness in those three. And by the way, those are the three temptations of Christ in the desert: love of power, love of wealth, and love of the easy life. So those forms of love are actually forms of self-love. On the other hand, if your centeredness is in other people, so that your care is for those you know and love of God Himself, which is experienced as person as well, if your centeredness is in these other people, then that is the love that the informed Christian is referring to. That love of and concern for others rather than for one's own self. So that's the way I think about it. That's also a way of describing detachment, by the way, which is a virtue. And of course, the most difficult detachment is to be detached from your own will in favor of other rather than self.
Okay. Richard or Bob, before I chime in again.
Well, this isn't Richard and this isn't Bob, but I'll chime in again. Dorothy Day was very much given to quoting Dostoevsky, various comments of various figures in Dostoevsky's novels. And she especially was given to citing Father Zosima, a character from Dostoevsky. And Zosima said in more than one way, but he said it this way: love in practice is a harsh and dreadful thing in comparison to love in dreams. And I was thinking of that last night. Our next door neighbor, elderly.
By the way, someone else is joining us?
No, I cut out and I just telephoned in again.
All right.
Oh, okay. That's why we didn't hear from you. Okay.
At any rate, the elderly neighbor couldn't extricate herself from between the bathtub and the toilet. And at 8:30 in the evening, her friend called to say she needed to be extricated. Well, who wanted to do that? But we did. And my daughter mentioned that it wasn't much fun, and of course she knew it wouldn't be much fun. And I said to her, not wanting to miss out on an opportunity to preach at one of my children, I said, you know, there's this phrase today that you often hear, I'm comfortable with this, or I'm not comfortable with that. And if you think about Scripture, you don't have this ideal of finding a way to make yourself comfortable with X, Y, or Z. And love and practice is very often a harsh and dreadful thing. Love and definitions is great. We have to define in order to understand what we're talking about. But when we come to love and practice, it is often a harsh and dreadful thing.
And nothing more dreadful than facing the crucifixion.
Yeah, that's right.
A Lenten thing that we must all do.
Right.
Well, what I've been thinking about lately, I've been quite a proponent of forgiveness. I give a lot of forgiveness talks all around the country and that. But what I've been thinking about lately is not only forgiveness, but when a person hurts you, you have to forgive them. But then you start to realize that actually what he did by hurting you is worse than the suffering that you had from how he hurt you. So we have to start thinking about the other person and show that person mercy and actually practice redemptive suffering by accepting our suffering and then offering it up to Jesus' suffering for the redemption of that person, for their salvation. So it's not only forgiveness, but there's also this idea of redemptive suffering to help that other person by showing mercy because they're in worse shape than you. So that's real love.
Yes.
And God allows us to be able to do that. Does that make sense?
Certainly
Yeah.
does.
Yeah.
One thing, though, I think Al said, are you, a question that often comes up, are you comfortable with this topic? And I must confess that whenever the topic of love comes up, I'm not comfortable. And maybe I could trace that to when I was a kid, a prepubescent. And there was my father and my mother. And now, yeah, you could say you love your mother, but to say you love your father, it just didn't seem right. And yet I admired him very much. We were close. But it looks like sometimes the question of love brings up the question between men and women. And men often find women quite confusing, and women find men quite confusing, which means the whole question of love gets confusing, which means the whole question of ordinary life to religion gets confusing. So I don't like the topic much, and when I do go to handle it, I say, well, let's do it from a safe distance. So I go to metaphysics, and then I say, well, now, should we love God? And you say, yes. And does God love us? Yes. And then you ask yourself, does God hate the devil? And the answer would seem to be yes. But should you love your enemy? And the answer to religion is yes. But then things can start getting confusing. See? And you go around and around and around on a topic that, well, I don't know how to grab it unless you start getting philosophical about it, but then, gee, that leads on to more talk and talk and talk and so on. So, well, I don't know if that advances the discussion any, but I mean, that's my reaction.
It gives me a huge opening. Okay, Richard.
Right.
Okay, I don't know if you missed where I was talking about my book. Well, different parts of this book you've probably seen over time. So one of the chapters of the book is what is love, then comes obstacles to love, then comes making more loving moral decisions, which was my old ethics book. And then comes a spiritual marathon where for 100 days, every day you try to become more loving. Okay, and this is all one book called The Way of Love. Anyhow, with defining love, C.S. Lewis wrote this book, The Four Loves, and it's not considered it's certainly not his most famous book, nor do most people think it's his best book, but from teaching it for years, it really is extremely helpful to exactly the question you raised, because it distinguishes between these four loves, which in Greek have these names. You have eros, you have philia, you have agape, and you have eros, philia, agape, and storge, love. And these are roughly translated as you have passion love, and passion can be for a pizza or for God or for a person who you're attracted to. It can be any of those passions, because in Greek, eros was not limited to lust, as we have it in our culture. Okay. And then you have friendship love. Filial love is friendship love. And then you have agapic love, which is this caring, Christian, sacrificial, self-donating love. And then you have this thing, storge, familial love, which is sometimes translated in his book as affection love. And that one, and so then what I ask people to do when they take my classes, they start out by making a list of everything they love. They would say they love all the way from pizza, soccer, to God. And they make this long list, and then I make them divide them into these four loves. So that helps a lot.
Well, Rhonda, when you've been asking people these questions for a long time, do you find there's a big divide between the typical answer of men and the typical answer of women to this question? Do you find a big difference?
No, because I teach almost exclusively Catholics, and so almost everyone, when I ask I ask them first, what is your definition of love? Almost all of them say sacrifice. Okay. Now, but on this thing of a remark that C.S. Lewis makes in one of his novels, actually, is that generally men consider that you show your love for other people by not annoying them, not making them sacrifice for you, whereas women think of love as this nurturing thing where you do all these things for you. If I love you, then I do all these things for you. So that would be something on masculine and feminine from C.S. Lewis.
Rhonda, say the masculine part again. I missed it.
That according to Lewis, men think if I love you, then I try not to annoy you. I try not to bother you, so I get out of your way. It's very witty, actually, but there's something in it. See, the thing with Lewis as opposed to von Hildebrand, I'm a disciple of von Hildebrand, and his definition of love is very inspiring, which is that love is a response to the unique preciousness of another person. He's talking about love of humans, other humans. Okay, not the unique preciousness of this piece of pizza. He means people. Okay, so his idea would be with love of persons that, see, if you didn't see, let's use Jim Hannock's example, if you didn't see this poor woman crushed between the toilet and the bathtub, if you didn't see her as precious, you wouldn't bother to go over there. But he means it more in terms of that definition. He means it primarily in terms of the thing of with friends or people you're in love with, that you see this preciousness of them such that you can't just say, well, it doesn't matter who I have, I just want a woman. When you fall in love, you don't say that. You want this woman. See? Or you don't want this woman, depending on how it is. If you don't fall in love, you don't want this woman. Or in friendship, why you have a whole group of people who are all in your same Catholic group. They all love the same things in the church, but some are your close friends and some aren't. Why? Because you see the unique preciousness of that person. And you want to be near them because you see that. Or another way von Hildebrand puts it is you join the stream of love God had for that person when he created that person. So,
Rhonda, Al, let me give you a test here. I married Jeannie, and why did I do that? Well, there are multiple reasons. But one of the reasons was she needed protection, and I needed to be needed. How does that fit in?
I think
it doesn't fit in with von Hildebrand's definition particularly.
All right,
but there are lots but still, look, there's so many people who there are plenty of weak women who need protection, but you didn't pick them, you picked Jeannie.
All right, let me get into this. Now, what Al just said is, I understand that. I understand that. And it makes sense for a man to use his strength to help someone he cares for, see? And the notion of self-sacrifice. So, for instance, if you get the military, where you usually don't think of it as an exercise in love, but you think of the Marines, young fellas, they join the Marines, and they're going to be the spearhead, even the head of the Army, and they're going to get themselves killed quicker than usually Army people will. And you wonder what got into them. And what you have is, especially in the Marines, this looking after each other, looking after their buddies. So that it won't be extraordinary sometimes to hear of a soldier, a hand grenade is thrown into the foxhole, and the soldier will leap on it to take the impact of the explosion to save his buddies. Now that's pretty grim stuff, but I mean, then you can see definitely, even for an inarticulate bunch of men, that's love, that's heroic. And of course then Christ fits into that. He wants to save the ones he loves from the being bullied and tortured and captured by the devil, and he goes to the extent of getting himself crucified, which he didn't have to. There are other ways God could have dealt with it, but he went in and got himself crucified. Then on those things, it echoes with me, and I don't have that much trouble with it. So anyway, whether that fits into the 4 categories of Lewis's love or any other category, I don't care, see? I mean,
no. Primarily it fits into 2 of them. It fits into the buddy is friendship, love. You use the word buddy. He wouldn't necessarily do that for someone who he never met, who's also in the Army. He might, but he might not. Then the agapic love is the sacrificial love to sacrifice for another. So that's a mix of agape and friendship. So, I mean, it helps, I think, to see that. If you said to the same one who is ready to die for his buddies, why don't you die for this man who just came yesterday? He might not.
Right.
If you think a little more broadly, the Marine not only is sacrificing himself for the other guys in the foxhole, but he has, by joining the Army voluntarily, or the Marines, he has sacrificed himself for his entire nation.
Yeah, I think that's very much the situation.
It starts there, and then it narrows down to 1 or 2 or 3 other folks in the foxhole. But it starts with this giving one's life to something he values more than himself, and that is often the nation.
And that's what's interesting is it's a lot of young men, certainly inexperienced in war. They haven't had the experience yet, and then they're somehow filled with this idea there's something glorious about it. But once they've gone through the hell of a war, I mean, really, people getting blown to pieces and all that stuff, and still staying at it, then you begin to see something like the heroism of Christ shining through, where it's people who know the horror of certain kinds of death still being there, offering themselves. And to think that that's in the young, especially young men, to do that for the nation, it's an awesome thought of having that in ordinary people, who may be religious or not so religious. It's just, I find it rather astounding.
Well, Jim here, I think we need to always focus on the distinctively Christian, and we're told that we are to love others as Christ has loved us, and that takes us beyond, say, the classical view of love or the Aristotelian view of love, and it connects us with the person of Christ.
I find my effort, when you talk about Christian, I keep thinking of grace building on nature. So there has to be a nature there first.
Yes.
A nature capable of development, but there's something already built into nature, see?
Yes, it's
and then the Christian builds on it, something even superior.
And also grace builds on nature by healing nature. And I'm very hesitant to use military analogies or actions based on the love of the nation. I think in the course of history, nations have been at least as destructive as they have been beneficial.
Oh, okay, now C.S. Lewis is right with you. C.S. Lewis was in World War I, and his buddy died, and after World War I, he went to live in the house of the mother of his buddy, which was very good, because while he was living with this buddy's mother, this mother had all sorts of character defects which he ridiculed for the rest of his life in all his books after she died. She wasn't a reader anyway, but anyhow. But leaving that aside, he has a whole chapter in the book For Loves about love of nation, and he makes a huge distinction between nationalism and patriotism, where he says a patriot would realize that if he loves his country because of apple pie, another person in Italy loves his nation because of pasta. So he wouldn't be thinking my nation is the best. He hated English chauvinistic nationalism. So you might find that interesting.
I do. I do.
No, this is Al. We can talk about the good and the bad of nations, but when it comes to the individual, you have to ride the horse you've got, and so you can't sit in your foxhole and say, well, gee, if there were no nations, I wouldn't have to sit in this foxhole. In the meantime, there's incoming, and you do what you have to do.
Yeah, that's
so
one
you
of
have
the
to ride.
reasons
You have to ride the horse you've got.
That's one of the reasons why I think that young people ought to be taught to think critically about what they get themselves into in the first place. I have a nephew who did 2 tours in Iraq, and he was a sniper, and he had a great loyalty to the people he was with. That's for sure. But that he would go to Iraq in the first place to kill people that he had no knowledge of, and he himself having no understanding of the political context of the whole thing, strikes me as a distortion of a natural inclination to love. We have to love God with our whole heart, our whole soul, and with our whole mind.
Okay, I happen to be reading this book. I've quoted it a few times. I don't know if on here or in my blog, by a cousin of the famous conductor Otto von Klemperer. And this is Victor von Klemperer. Victor von Klemperer was a Jew who married a Lutheran, became a Lutheran, but doesn't seem to be very religious. And he was in Dresden for the whole war. And the thing was, because he was in World War I as a soldier, and because he was married to a Lutheran, and because he was not yet 65, they didn't throw him in the concentration camp, though he thought they would every day. Every day the Gestapo came by to this place called the Jew House, and where they were highly restricted. They couldn't go out without showing the stars, and if they had the star, they couldn't eat in restaurants, they couldn't go to the library, they couldn't ride on the train, they had to walk everywhere they wanted to go, even if it was 10 miles. It was a terrible time. And he described, it's a diary, a 3-volume diary, 500 pages each. It's an amazing document. And he survived the war. And after the war, these diaries were published and became bestsellers in Germany because they described all the stuff. So he explains how these Jews who lived in Germany, most of them were nationalistic about Germany until Hitler started the anti-Semitic stuff. They loved Germany. And many of them, I didn't know this at all, there were a whole bunch of German Jews who hated Zionism because they wanted to be this wonderful cultural European. who loved Goethe and, Mozart and Beethoven. They didn't want to be Zionists living on a farm in Israel. It was very, very interesting.
Edith Stein, during World War I, especially...
She was a nurse, and she was a nurse.
Yeah, especially in the first stages of World War I, wrote that she was sure that Germany would win because the whole people were one, and how could they possibly lose? And when I read that, I thought, how could you be so naive?
Yeah, but you see, it just wasn't obvious where all this was going.
Well, it
so
wasn't
nationalism
blind. It wasn't obvious to her, Rhonda, but there were plenty of people at that time that recognized that it was a grotesque sort of nationalism, and it was on both sides, the English side and
right
German side. There's this wonderful thing that Simone Weil says that's often struck me in different contexts. She says that people oftentimes exculpate Aristotle because no one thought at the time that slavery could be wrong. And she said, well, look, if you read Aristotle, Aristotle says. Now, some people think that slavery is wrong. So it's not as if no one thought slavery was wrong. He himself was aware that some people thought slavery was wrong.
Well, you have there in those times, you didn't have POWs. You either died or you became if you were captured, you either died or you became a slave. That was the choice.
Yeah, but I'm sure.
So it makes it. I mean, it changes the way. And the slaves then, the Roman slaves and the slaves of the Jews were treated much better than in our century, which is interesting.
In some cases, yes, and in some cases, no.
Yeah. Well, I read a whole huge book about this.
I know, and any whole...
You read the same book, I think.
Any whole huge book you read has other whole huge books that say something.
The other way, yes.
Right.
You don't want to be uncritical.
No, but it does explain why people didn't think of it the same way we do. It wasn't as if they were the slaves. I mean, the slaves of the Jews, for instance, the Jews were forbidden by Mosaic law to mistreat slaves.
Yeah,
so
but now
plus they might have still done it
from the Mosaic law to the Mosaic law, from the Roman law and the Athenian law.
No.
All right, wait, hey, let me cut in here. Let me cut in here.
Cut it, dude.
Yeah, with something out of left field, okay?
All right.
All right, I'm thinking today of a guy like Trump, okay? And for some people, he's an egomaniac, and I used to think that. But what I see him doing now is focusing very much on trying to help the people, not the political party, not the ideology, helping the people. And he's trying, and he realizes that's a lot bigger job than putting up a skyscraper in Manhattan. Now, look, if you know Manhattan and putting up a skyscraper, you know that's a pretty big operation, right? Well, he says the trying to help the people of the nation is a hell of a lot bigger, see. And but he's going to bring what he has to the project. Now, there, he's venturing very much into the territory of God or Christ, it seems to me, whether he realizes it or not. And showing, I think, far more courage or insight than a lot of bishops and cardinals even, and priests and all that business, which is sort of ironic because he actually hasn't lived like you would imagine a cardinal or a bishop to be living. And yet here he is. Something's driving him, using his talent, and he knows he doesn't necessarily have to win this one. He's never been in anything quite this big before, but he's out there. And so I look upon him as a very unusual, and yet it's certainly natural. It fits into the way he's moved in the past, but I think he's moving into the supernatural, and the supernatural is going to say, hey, on this side of the grave, no one wins. Everybody dies, and the real victory comes in the next life. So, anyway, Anyway, I like talking about that, so, I don't know if that helps anybody.
That was certainly from left field, I'll give you that much.
Right.
But I like it very much because it brings us into the fact that agapic love, certainly there are people who are not religious who do sacrificial things for other people, but Christian charity is a huge, advance on that in all kinds of very important ways. I just want to make sure when this recording is edited sometime, take out the Romans. It was just a slip of the tongue because I'm 79 years old and I don't know what I'm saying anymore. So I really didn't mean it. It was just like because you were talking about Aristotle, so I got confused.
Well, you know what? In politics, they say you walked back on that one, or you walked that one back. Now, I certainly do admire Trump's spirit of initiative, but other than that, I find very little to admire. And to suggest that he's leading us into the supernatural is an extraordinarily charitable interpretation, on my view.
Yeah, see, and we could fight about that for an hour or two, but you let it go,
Yeah, this is Al, as the one non-philosopher in this group.
You're a philosopher.
I'm not professionally.
Beware of credentialism, sir. Beware of credentialism. I take you to be a philosopher.
Okay, but here's the point I want to make. Just listening to you folks, I hear some arguing from a macro scale and some arguing from a micro scale, and trying to use the facts of each side to disprove the other side, and it doesn't work that way, I don't think. As in economics, there's macro and microeconomics, and they are truly separate and distinct fields. And I hear that in the conversation of this gaggle of philosophers here, that some are arguing from the macro and some from the micro. And I think Jim is arguing from the micro, if I understand it, and certainly Richard Garrity is arguing from the macro, especially with his background in metaphysics.
Well, let me contribute to this discussion by saying that the common doctor, St. Thomas, speaks in behalf of what's called the unity of the virtues. Some virtues we see as, say, focused on the life of the family. Some virtues we see as focused on the life of the people. But there has to be a unity of the virtues. Just as God is one, so also ultimately love is one. And if we were to have one virtue, especially one of the cardinal virtues, if we're to really have it, we have to have all of the cardinal virtues. A person who's not prudent will not be able to be brave or courageous because he won't act in a way that uses practical wisdom. So all of the virtues actually form a unity. And character counts. That's a popular way of saying this. All of the virtues form a unity. So we don't have private life and public life, and there's this chasm between the two. It all forms a one life. Harumph! Harumph! Harumph, he said.
Now, okay, so one of the ways that book is constructed is we don't get off the hook reading the book, the students who have to read it. We don't get off the hook just talking in general. We have to get into this 100-day marathon. and where they don't have to give personal examples in class as such, but they have to just challenge themselves. So every day there's a challenge. So the challenge, for instance, can be, how about spending a whole day not giving unwanted advice to people who consider you an arrogant SOB, for instance?
Interesting category.
My vocabulary has become worse and worse. I don't know why. I think I know what it is. In old age, you get less inhibited. So I come out with these words which amaze people. But
what
anyhow,
a future awaits us. What a future awaits us.
In purgatory, of course, I can't do that. So anyway. So, I mean, the thing is, we talk about love in very abstract ways, but a very important point I want to make is this. When I was studying at Fordham University years and years ago as a graduate student, I read this book by Martin Darcy, F.J., who was a famous English Jesuit, and it is a bombshell book called The Mind and Heart of Love, because he was trying to refute a famous book by Nygren, who was a Protestant theologian. And the gist of the book is you can't say that the only Christian love is this sacrificial love, because Christians are supposed to love God with their whole heart, minds, and souls and all their strength. And that's a passionate love we're supposed to have. We're not supposed to, God doesn't need us. So if the only love is sacrificial love to help the needy, God doesn't need us. So what is this other love that Christians have? And certainly you see in the saints this passionate love of God. So it was a very interesting book. And maybe you would like to address that, some of you.
Worthwhile.
Well, a thought that occurs is that love this side of the grave is one thing because there are evils to be fought and difficulties to be on the other side of the grave. The battle's over. And the poor and the indigent, they are no more. And then there's love, certainly, but it's a different kind.
Yeah.
And you wouldn't call it sacrificial up in heaven. You'd call it on earth sacrificial, but you wouldn't call it in heaven.
I would call it appreciation.
That's over with.
I would call it appreciation in heaven.
Yeah, appreciation. Yeah, sheer joy, appreciating the other. See? Unmixed.
Yeah. Okay. But of course, passionate love in marriage is a sacrament, is part of the sacrament.
Which is, part of having a body, which is part of being on this earth.
No, we have a resurrected body, but of course we don't have sex in heaven, but just the same, many people, Catholics, even though we say every day, every Sunday in the Creed, I believe in the resurrection of the body, they picture heaven as just the soul. For what it's worth.
Well, in heaven, the man and the wife, who are man and wife on earth, which is definitely an exclusive bond, there won't be that in heaven, will there be?
An exclusive bond, no. Not exclusive bond, but it will still be, you will be happier, I would say, you will be happier that your spouse made it to heaven than you're going to be happy about somebody you never met ever.
Right, and you still have a body, but it's a glorified body. So that's quite it's a body, but it's different from the bodies we have on earth.
Well, not numerically different.
No, not numerically.
Oh, wait a minute. This is a show we should do. We should have a show about what will heaven be like. Especially since I wrote a book with Richard and Ruth Ballard on that subject, what the saints said about heaven. Unless we did it already. Did we do it already?
No.
No, we haven't.
No.
I'm writing furiously here.
No, we could have done it on the old open door. See, the old open door was when I wrote that book. The old open door is on a website that Bob Olson put together called Spirituality Running to God. And it's designed as an outreach to people who aren't necessarily Catholics. By using that word spirituality, running to God, we're trying to attract people who are not believers.
I heard of a couple that every night before they went to bed, they talked about what heaven was going to be like. And what I heard is it changed their whole life.
I bet. So this would be a good topic.
It's on the list.
Some people who are not Catholic believers think that heaven will be boring because they don't like hymns. So they need to have a better vision.
And they don't all have to play the harp either.
Right.
So where does that leave us, folks, with Christian love?
No, the topic was what is love? Oh, you mean, but anyway, now we're talking about Christian love. And I agree certainly with what Jim said in his opening salvo about, or his quote from Dorothy Day.
That was a riff, not a salvo, a riff.
Oh, okay. Okay. You know, Dorothy Day quoting Dostoevsky, this whole thing, that especially in, I think, family love, many of us have families where there are a lot of conflicts and within the family, and yet we feel this tremendous bond at the same time. So we don't want to say, I'm going to write you off because we don't agree on this. We don't want to say that. On the other hand, the conversations about this, and this, which involve life and death, political issues, lead us to such pain. There's tremendous pain in that. I keep thinking of Pope Benedict wrote a book, one of his books. He says something about you can't forgive without first having a sort of burning pain.
Well, when I hear the term Christian love, what strikes me is if you don't go to grace or the Christian or Christ, you can't say human love on its own terms because it's too hard. The human, just the human, just looking at the human. To maintain even humanity, you're going to need grace, the supernatural. Otherwise, human love degenerates. It falls apart. So that I don't see the human maintaining itself without the supernatural. The wound is too deep. And I think you have to bring in the supernatural just to keep the human, keep it halfway human or a quarter human. And so that's how I think the two fit together.
Well, in my own experience, I always did a lot of good things, okay? as a non-Christian. But when I became a Christian, then I did the same things, but it was different. Because when I was doing them before, it was for my benefit. It gratified me, like you were saying early on, Commander Al. About this, when you love a hamburger, that's your, that's for your gratification. And is that love? Is that real love when you love a hamburger?
No, people are very careless in the use of that word.
Oh, wait a minute. St. Thomas Aquinas, of all people, defines love as an appetite for the good. But hamburgers can be in there.
He knew all about appetite, didn't he?
But like I say, there's a big difference in sacrifice when it's to make you feel good. Okay? Once you're converted, then you're doing it for Jesus to make him feel good.
Well, then, of course, that makes you feel good at a higher level.
Well, okay.
For instance, does God loving his creation make him feel good?
Yeah.
It's a peculiar way, but
yes,
God is fulfilling himself. God is God. He's fulfilling himself as God.
But see, when you're doing it for Jesus, you're going to continue to do it. If you're doing it for yourself, you may stop doing it.
Well, yeah. Now I think that's a real thing. You figure it isn't worth it. It isn't too much grief. You're sticking your chin out, and getting it punched.
That's right.
So obviously, for instance, take divorce. Obviously, a person who's in a very, very painful marriage, who doesn't believe in eternal life, if he or she thinks, I have to be miserable my whole life and then we die, or I could divorce this man and marry this man who I love where I'll have a wonderful life on earth, of course that sounds different to a person if they believe in redemptive suffering and eternal life than if they don't. It has to make a difference.
Right. I think that's a good example.
We have 3 minutes.
Yeah, okay, good. Bob, this is Al. Maybe I should introduce the topic for next week. I heard Dr. Garrity there warming up for next week because the topic, he brought up metaphysics there in the discussion, and that's the topic next week. And Dr. Richard Garrity is going to be leading the charge on that subject. It's metaphysics.
Oh, wait a minute.
What, why, and how.
Okay, Richard, you should know, one of the moderators of another show, a woman called Mary Schwartz, who moderates a show on spirituality, she's going to be driving from New York City to Connecticut, where I'm going to be for 4 days visiting there. And so she, Bob, and I are all going to be on Open Door. She doesn't know much about metaphysics, so I said, good. You can just ask questions. You can make sure you understand what Richard is talking about. So you should be forewarned of that.
Now, I had a communication with that woman, and she told me she was going to ask Richard, what is being?
What is being? Yeah.
She said that was her main question, and that she would not let him avoid it.
Okay, right. Richard, you've had your warning.
Okay.
Okay. So I think that'll just about conclude our discussions, lovingly, of course, on this lovely day. And so I'll turn it back over to Bob, and you can wrap this thing up, Bob.
Okay, well, it's been a wonderful day. It's been a wonderful discussion. We thank each and every member that was here today again. And so we just ask the Lord to bless each and every one of us and all listening. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen.
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 See you next week.
Take care.
Okay.
We hope you enjoyed the program and will join us back for another show on WCAT Radio. This is Sebastian Mahfood. Good day.